Welcome to this edition of Cup Chat with Birding with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. Today, special guest Bryan Calk joins us in episode 56 to discuss identifying geese. Hope you enjoy.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Cup Chat. I'm Maureen Frank with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service, and joining us today is Bryan Calk, who most of y'all know if you've been on here before. He is one of our guides and also part of our team with Birding with Extension. He helps us with all kinds of things. Emily is not on today. She is in the middle of stock show craziness, so I don't know where she is, but I guarantee she's exhausted, smells like sheep, surrounded by kids, and wouldn't have it any other way. So, so first off, thanks for sticking with us. We had some very strange technology issues. Second off, last week we didn't talk about our mugs. So Bryan, I don't know what you have this week, but I've been kind of waiting to debut this one because my support staff got it for me for Christmas. Isn't it?
That's
so
adorable.
cute? I love it. And on the inside, it says, "Don't forget to be awesome." So I think it's adorable. And I was so excited that I finally got to show it off. So
I coincidentally also have a mug that I've been waiting to debut. This
I'm
is
so
my
excited.
quail mug. All little quail.
Oh,
They're sort of like in a Pueblo style, but
they're so
anyway.
cute, but they're upside down. Are they? No. Oh, it's narrower at the top.
Right, yes. It's
Oh,
an
okay.
interesting.
I was like, I think you're holding it so that all your coffee is going to fall out.
No, we're good.
I like that. That's very cool. Very New Mexico. It fits your whole theme very well. So very cool. All right. Well, today we're talking about identifying geese. And I know you have some pictures and things to share with us, but first let's just talk about kind of geese in general. If I walk up to a pond and I'm on one side and clear on the other side, I can see some birds. Ducks versus geese. Like, how am I, big picture, what would I look for?
Great question. So big picture, we're looking at overall larger birds than we think of with most ducks. And proportionally, they're kind of shaped differently. So geese have these longer necks than ducks do. Ducks tend to have their heads sort of tucked in close to their body. Geese have this long neck, sort of like you think of like a swan, but not quite that extreme either, right? A lot of times we'll see them on water just like we do ducks, but frequently geese can be seen out grazing, kind of like a herd of sheep. But I guess those would be the main differences for me, is just looking at that shape is quite different.
And across Texas, I don't know if you looked this up or know off the top of your head, but geese is not necessarily something we like think about with Texas. It's definitely one of our winter species, but it's not like we're, maybe known for like our diversity of geese species. But how many species of geese are there in Texas?
Well, there are 5 regularly occurring. And occasionally we'll get rarities. I would think the most common rarity would be brant, which is more of a East Coast and West Coast bird, but occasionally they show up in the interior US. I'm not sure if we have records of anything else though.
Okay. So it's it's kind of, I like waterfowl for beginning birders for a couple of reasons. One, because they like to sit out on the open water, so that helps, you're not trying to pick them out through the trees. For 2, because they're big, relative to something like a sparrow or a warbler. And for 3, because there's not as many of them. So if you're trying to decide which one of 5 species is easier than being like, we've got, 20 warblers that this could be. So.
Right, exactly. Yeah, once you can narrow down that it is a goose that you're looking at, you really don't have a lot of options after that. So,
but I will say
a different.
Yeah, it is a little bit different challenge, because I was also going to say one thing that's tricky with waterfowl is that some species are hunted, and so it can be kind of tricky because they see people and they're like, I'm out of here. So do you have tips on, now we're getting more into like the birding side, but if you want to see waterfowl other than just going to the water, what are some tips for making sure you can see geese?
Sure. So this was a challenge for me growing up in rural South Texas, where everything is private land, and that means a lot of that land is hunted, um, which is great. Nothing against that, but it meant climbing up the side of stock tanks on the ranches just to peek over like this and see some little specks of ducks from 300 yards away, and then you go like this and then they flush. That's one experience. When now I live in Albuquerque in the metro area where there's no hunting, and I can walk up and pet a canvasback. It's like totally different experience. So I would recommend trying to find places where the birds are not actively being hunted. So whether that's a local park or wildlife refuge, a lot of times city parks can be really great. No hunting going on there. So finding those areas where they're accustomed to people, in they're trained to think of people as not a threat so much, right? That would be my advice if there's anything like that near you. Otherwise, being real sneaky, getting a blind, something like that.
Or army crawling up to peek over the tank. That's a good visual. I like that. Mm-hmm. Is there, sometimes when we're thinking about other species of birds, like you're not going to ever find a golden-cheeked warbler. I won't say ever. You're not going to find a golden-cheeked warbler in an urban area, even if you've got like a juniper. There's probably not going to be a golden-cheeked warbler hanging out in that. Are there species of ducks or geese that would not show up in an urban park, or are they pretty much all fair game that they might show up in urban areas?
So I would say definitely there are certain species that are more prone to show up in urban areas. I think it just depends on where you are. Like when I came out here to Albuquerque, like I said, the canvasbacks, they're just in these little city ponds, and I'm just like still flabbergasted to this day. And same with the pintails, they're just like, they'll just come eat out of your hand. It's just bizarre. And they're all migratory. They all leave. They'll come back and leave just like every other migratory bird. But they just know that they're accustomed to people here. So I would say in general, if you think about with ducks, you think about divers versus dabblers. So divers are the ducks that dive completely underwater and forage along the bottom, or they hunt fish or whatever. Those kinds of ducks are just by default are going to require a certain type of body of water. So they're going to want deeper water, depending on what they're looking for to eat. Versus dabbling ducks, they're fine to just skim stuff off the top, and those are going to be more likely what you see in urban areas. Taking that opportunity to eat from people. With geese, sort of similar. Occasionally, you'll see Snow and Ross's geese on urban ponds, but you'll maybe see like one or two. Whereas Canada geese are just everywhere. Everybody's familiar with that. So yeah, it really does depend species by species.
And that's a good point too. First off, at some point we need to make this a really popular dance move, the dabbler, because I love that.
The dabbler.
Yeah. But also it's a good point just about thinking about what they eat. That has so much to do with any species where we're going to find it. And when you're thinking about those diving versus dabbling ducks, but for geese, realizing that a lot of them are going to be dabbling, and then some of them, like you said, are going to be kind of grazing. They'll come out and eat that's not really something we see ducks do, but they'll come out and eat the vegetation. And this is why they can be a wildlife damage management problem. We could do a whole segment on like mitigating waterfowl issues, especially with Canada geese, because they can, they're large and can be a little bit aggressive, but just because there's so many of them, and there were quite a few that would winter in the area, or pass through or winter in the area where I was in Colorado, and they'd hang out like on the high school track and along the field there. And so if you were running for PE, sometimes you had to like leap over piles of goose poop, and so there's like human health concerns. That's a whole separate topic there. So okay, so let's get into some of our different species, and how do we tell them apart? How do we know who's who, especially if they're at a little bit of a distance?
Sure. Okay. Well, at a distance is that was a fun thing to throw in there at the end. So
Okay, first let's pretend they're close up.
okay, yeah, that I like that. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm going to share my screen and just show you guys some pictures, but please like stop me at any point.
Yep, figured.
It says it's disabled.
Oh, I thought I shared it with you. Oh, you know what? I bet when I restarted my, oh, no, you don't want my screen. Although my screen does have birds on it. Okay.
Oh, there we go. Got it.
Work. Okay.
All right. So you should be looking at a nice, pretty white goose. Is that right?
I've got a lag. Oh, yep, there it is now. Yes.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to start off with what we like to call the white geese, which are named obviously because they're mostly white. So this is the snow goose up first. And so I think of them as sort of the bigger, meaner version of the white goose. And that's just something that helps me sort of visualize in sort of like a general sense. It's not scientific at all, but whatever works, right? So with the white geese, at a distance, it's going to be really tough because you really want to see some of the details around the head, especially. So I guess let's start with some of those on this guy. So we're going to zoom in on the head here. Oops. All right. So what I look for on a snow goose is I look at the bill. And I think of the bill, there's just lots of curved lines around the bill of a snow goose. So first of all, can you see my little cursor here?
Yes.
Okay, so right here where the the base of the bill connects to the face, there's this sort of curve where the feathering goes in towards the bill, right? And then the mandible down below is also curved. And we've got this big curvy black patch on the side of the bill we would call a grin patch that sort of disrupts this bright pink coloring.
It does make him look kind of angry, like going with that angry goose theme. The grin patch is, yeah, he looks mad.
Totally. You're right. Yeah, there's something about it just like, he's like scowling at you. So we look at those things, and then we look also just at the overall shape of the bill is longer, more sloping, just larger overall, which we'll compare to in just a little bit with the other white goose. And then we also look at the shape of the head. It's relatively sloped up top, kind of flat, kind of blocky. In comparison, right? Everything's relative. So when I'm comparing the white geese, I do like to look at those details on the head. However, if you have a bunch of white geese together and they're all either standing really nicely for you, giving you a nice comparison, or if they're all in flight at the same level above you and you have that nice comparison, the body size between the two white geese is very different. So snow goose being the larger of the two. Any questions about snow goose?
No, I think it's kind of one thing that I think is kind of funny is with ducks, we talk about where's the white, and then now we're talking about a bird that's completely white. So it's just funny.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
Right. Well, almost everywhere. So in flight, which I did not grab a picture in flight, but they do have these black sort of flight feathers. So you'll see this bright white bird with just these black flight feathers. So up next, we have our other white bird, or other white goose, which is the Ross's goose. And so again, sort of just all white. You can see those dark flight feathers, pink legs, just like snow goose. But we see it looks different, right? On the face, right away we can tell. And when we zoom in, we can see these differences.
Yeah, this one's not mad at me.
Right. This one's kind of cute. The eye is proportionally larger, so he has kind of that cute little face. And I'm just going to kind of go in reverse of what I was talking with the snow goose. Looking at the shape of the head, it's more curved over the top, so more rounded, domed top shape to the head, just rounder overall. They tend to have a steeper, what I think of as a steeper forehead. That's not the most reliable thing, but overall just cuter in the face. I don't know really how else to put it. And then when we look at the bill, a lot less curvature, wavy lines going on. So we look at where the bill connects to the face, almost straight up and down, right? Whereas the snow goose curved in with feathers going in towards the bill. Almost completely lacking that black grin patch. They'll have, it's variable, but it's almost not there at all, always. The mandible is not nearly as curved, and the bill overall is shorter. So I think of the snow goose as being more of a longer, stretched out triangle, and the Ross's goose is more of a compact, more equilateral shaped triangle, sort of wedged onto the face. And then the color of the bill on the Ross's goose is still bright pink, but towards the face, they get kind of this bluish color. It's kind of dusting and kind of creating this sort of duskiness here at the base of the bill. But at a distance, it's very tough unless you have a good comparison of the two species.
Yeah,
so
that's perfect.
Here we have a couple, we have a good little comparison here. Oops.
Okay, and that's a great picture, because that was something that I wanted to have you talk about a little bit, is if you come up and you see a flock of 20, 30, 40 geese, and you're like, oh, okay, that first one is a snow goose. Should you assume that, like, you're entering this on eBird, should you assume that all 20 are snow geese? And I think from this picture pretty well answers that question.
Right, definitely. You definitely do not want to do that. I remember when I was in college over at A&M in College Station, and we were doing, whether we were doing a Christmas bird count or a big day or whatever, and we were looking for those snow goose flocks overhead, it was always a matter of find the Rosses, right? And so we would scan through the skein of geese looking for the one that's obviously much smaller than the other ones. So sometimes you'll just have one Rosses mixed in with a bunch of snows. Sometimes you'll have ratios that are more like 50-50. It just depends on where you are. I know I've witnessed at Bosque del Apache here in New Mexico, we'll have these huge congregations of white geese. And occasionally you'll see, oh, there's the Ross's goose in the mix of the snows. And then you'll kind of keep working the flock, and you'll be like, oh my gosh, all of these over here are Rosses. Like, it's just all the Rosses are concentrated together. So it seems like when there are a lot of Rosses present, they kind of stick together within the flock, but very much the whole flock of white geese will all be together.
And you used an important word to define there, a skein of geese. Can you talk about that?
Oh, sure. So that's just when the geese or waterfowl are migrating and they form those V shapes in the sky. That's all that word means.
Yeah, that's your fun word for today. Is a V of geese is called a skein of geese. So.
Yep. So this picture, just to illustrate where having this comparison of the two species is very helpful. So we have the Ross's goose here kind of tucked up at an awkward angle. But you can see overall the body size is smaller than the nearby snow goose. And then look at the bill, just much more petite. Again, I just think cuter looking, doesn't have that black grin patch. Rounder crown of the head you see versus the flatter top of the snow goose. So yeah,
and it's really straight where that bill connects. It's like somebody took a triangle and just like stuck it on his face, as opposed to it got more integrated on the snow geese.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a very common description that's used. It's just kind of like a snow cone or something just like smashed into the face.
Yeah, like making a snowman and you just like take the carrot and like shove it in there. That's what it looks like.
Right. Totally. Yep. And I guess we can note here that this snow goose that's kind of sleeping back here, he's got his eye closed. This is an immature bird, so he's got some kind of dusky grayness to it. Whereas the adults are bright white. So all winter long, you'll still see these immature birds and sort of that grayish plumage.
Yeah, that's a good thing to talk about. Because, sorry, I was going to say, the other thing, when we were talking about ducks, we talked about males and females looking pretty different. But geese, no way to tell, huh?
No.
So I think that's good. In this picture, you can see that one looks a little bit different, but it's not a male versus female thing. It's an immature versus adult.
Right, definitely. And it gets even more interesting when they don't look like the white goose, when they look like this. And so the snow geese and the Ross's geese, we believe, have what we call a blue morph, which is just a dark version of the same thing, right? So we see this with reddish egrets. We have the dark morph reddish egret and the white morph, where the white morph is just completely white. The dark morph is the more common, is, you know, dark and reddish, where snow geese, we think of the default being all white, but they do have this dark blue goose morph. So this is not a phase. It's not a color phase. It's not something that's ephemeral. It's that when they're born a blue snow goose, they are going to be a blue snow goose for their entire life. It's not necessarily a subspecies thing either. It's just a color variant.
Like how if you have two Labrador retrievers, you'll get yellows and browns or yellows and chocolates and blacks all out of the same litter.
Exactly. Right. Exactly the same thing. Now with snow geese, it just depends on where you are geographically, what percentage of your local flock may be blue versus white. And with Ross's geese, I have yet to ever see a blue Ross's goose in person. It's one of my birding goals to one day see that. It's an extremely rare color morph. Maybe 1 in 10 million or 1 in 5 million or something is a blue Ross's goose. So if you see the blue morph, chances are you're looking at a snow goose.
That guy's grin patch is very obvious. Like you see him and remembering about the grin patch, you go, that's a snow goose.
Exactly right. Yeah, all the things we just talked about still apply. With the shape of the bill, the grin patch, the shape of the head, body size, all those things are the same, just a different color on the body. So I think that pretty much wraps up the white geese.
Yeah.
Should we move on?
Yeah, go for it.
Cool. So I'm just going to use one picture for the next guys. I thought it was perfect. So these are the bane of my personal existence. I just really, people get super into these, to the Canada, what is the Canada and cackling goose. And I just don't get it. It does not draw me. But but that's the great thing about birding, right? We can all be passionate about different things. So I am not passionate about subspecies of Canada goose like some people are. No shade to them. Good for you. But generally speaking, it's a really actually very similar concept to what we just talked about with the white geese. So on the left here we have the Canada goose, larger body size overall, larger bill, longer neck proportionally to the body generally, versus the cackling goose, which has a smaller overall body size, much smaller bill, relatively shorter neck. And now there are, like I was alluding to, lots of subspecies of Canada goose, several subspecies of cackling goose. They used to be considered the same species. They were split. And with those subspecies, there are, in between, there are overlaps, just, with the pure subspecies, there are overlap between Canada and cackling goose with their body size, with their bill size. pretty much everything that we use to identify them. And then within the subspecies of Canada geese, they all like to integrate, and same with cackling goose. And then cackling goose and Canada goose like to hybridize. So when they look sort of in between and iffy, there are a lot of geese that I just do not identify to species, and I just call it a slash. When they look like this in this picture, and it's very clear, and you've got extremes of the cackling and the Canada, it can be fairly easy to tell them apart when you have that comparison. But these guys get very complicated, and that's just a rabbit hole you can decide to go down if you want to, but not for me.
So something I want to point out real quick as we're looking at these two that you talked about is you said looking at the relative size of the neck. And I think that's important because when you look at these, you're like, oh yeah, the Canada goose has a much longer neck, and that's obvious. But remember that sometimes sometimes the way to compare these, if you don't have them side by side like this, is compare body parts of the bird relative to the body of the bird. So like if you take that neck of the Canada goose and imagine laying it out against its body, its neck is almost as long as its body. Like the length of the neck is maybe like 90% of the length of the body. Whereas on that cackling goose, like, yes, it's, it's shorter in an absolute sense, but also if you picture taking that neck and putting it against its body, it's maybe like 60% of the length of the cackling goose's body. So that's a helpful tip sometimes when you're like, well, they're not next to each other, or, what do I compare it against? Compare it against the bird itself, and especially its body kind of helps with those relative sizes.
Definitely. That's an excellent point. And that's something we can do with the bills too, actually, is if you're looking, if you're trying to determine the length of the bill, you can say, if I put that bill in the width of the bill and compare it to the width of the bird's neck, that's a good comparison there too. Like with snow geese versus Ross's geese, the Ross's goose bill is going to be not as wide as the neck. I know it's kind of like hard to say for me, but hopefully that makes sense.
You need a picture where you just like crop the nose, because if you look at that on these two as well, if you look at the bill of the Canada goose, if you stuck it against its neck, it would stick out, and on the cackling goose, it would not. It would stay within the length of the neck. So
right, exactly. Well said.
Those cheek patches, I'm sure this is something that varies, but that's a different shape on the cackling goose versus the Canada goose. Is that just not worth looking at?
Not worth looking at, in my opinion. So there's some subspecies of, I think, cackling goose, I really don't remember, where the white cheek patch doesn't wrap all the way around. It's like divided by black underneath. That can kind of be a helpful thing, I think, sometimes. Another thing that gets people, can trip people up when you're just looking in your Sibley or Nat Geo or whatever, you may see reference to this white collar here, where the black neck meets the brown breast. Again, not a super helpful thing unless you're very well read on your subspecies. That's not something I would ever use to differentiate Canada or cackling or things like that. Same with the white cheek patch. Those can be looked at when you're looking at subspecies, but I mean, you've got to be on that level, I think, before you start looking at that.
All right. Then
it's very complicated.
Moving past our two frustrating species of geese.
Right.
For us next.
Sure. Let me make this a little bigger. We see here a lot of geese like we were just looking at, right? But we see something that's a little different in the middle, right? So this goose doesn't have the black neck and head, doesn't have that white cheek patch. It's still dark overall, right? It's still got that kind of white vent area. Again, another goose that you see sort of mixed in with other species of geese sometimes, and that is the greater white-fronted goose. So this is our fifth and sort of final common goose that we find in Texas. And you just see it's, if you get a good look, it's pretty hard to confuse with any of the other geese. Like the Canada versus cackling, it does, like I just mentioned, doesn't have that black head or neck, doesn't have the white cheek patch, doesn't look like anything like the white geese. But things that we look at for a greater white-fronted goose, you look at the orange bill, orange legs, these black or dark brown blotches on the belly and going up. That gave them, one of their colloquial names is the speckle belly. Amongst hunters, they kind of have this speckled belly. And the white front, when we say greater white-fronted goose, the white front is this white area right where the bill meets the head. But that's about it. These guys can form very large homogeneous flocks of just white-fronted geese, but they can also be mixed in with other species as well.
That bill and those legs are very striking. It took me a long time to pay attention for some reason to the legs and bills of birds, but on certain species it can be really helpful. And on him that really stands out from our other species. Like in that previous picture you had mixed in with the Canada geese, it's like you can see that like they're so dark on their bill and their legs, and you see these two little orange legs out among everybody else, so that kind of stands out.
Right, yeah. Well, I mean, with waterfowl, a lot of times we see them sitting on the water and it's like, well, I don't know what color their feet are. But then suddenly they'll walk out and it'll be like a shoveler or something has like bright orange feet. And you're like, whoa, I didn't know that was there.
Yeah. And like especially because they're so, compared to a songbird, their legs are, relatively sturdy and thick, and so it's not just like it's very obvious once you see them next to each other because it's a fairly large amount of color. It's kind of funny. So, right. Okay. Yeah, if I'm not in Texas, is there anything I might confuse a white-fronted goose with?
Good question. And we're still, I mean, I don't know about internationally, but within
in the US.
North America. Okay. Yeah. Really not a lot, I wouldn't say. If you get a good look, I mean, at a distance, if you're looking through a scope and there's a hazy brown blob, then maybe. But if you get a pretty good look at it, I don't think there's a whole lot. Occasionally, very, very rarely actually, in the outer Alaskan islands or Alaska in general, I think, they'll occasionally see lesser white-fronted goose, which is in sort of a old world species. Otherwise, no, I don't think so.
Okay, there's one more though that I get questions about here, especially like from San Antonio that we didn't cover. And I'm going to pull up the picture. I'll share my screen in a second, but there's one more goose I feel like we have to talk about, and they are funny looking because they're not all white and they don't look like our Canada goose with the cheek patch, and some of their body is a little similar to the white-fronted, but they don't have the speckling. So overall I'm kind of looking at this gray goose with brown wings and then kind of a rusty color on its rump mixed in with some black feathers, but then its head, we've got a pink bill with a black tip, this big orangey eye patch and an orange eye and bright pink legs, and they are goofy looking. And if I see one of those, what am I talking about?
You are talking about a bird that I am bummed that I forgot to put on this presentation. I completely forgot about them. You are looking at an introduced species called the Egyptian goose.
And let me share my screen so everybody can see. The only reason I don't forget about them is because I get so many questions about them because they're so funny looking and people see them and they're like, it's interesting how with some species you can be like, that doesn't seem like it's native. Like when the first time I saw a chucker, like you're like, you can just tell they're not from North America, which is really interesting how we kind of you get this picture of what you expect. It just looks like an Asian species. And I think the same thing with an Egyptian goose. You're like, it just doesn't, it looks out of place. So let me see if I can share my screen really quick so everybody can see what we're talking about. So
Yep.
Can you see it? There we go. Egyptian goose. So.
Yep. And these guys in Texas are really getting a pretty strong population going in the hill country. I know around Kerrville area, there's quite a few of them, Austin area, as well as Houston and some other places. They, much like the house sparrow and rock pigeon and those sorts of established species that we now call countable, the Egyptian goose, I don't think it's countable yet, but it will soon be, in my opinion.
Yeah, when I was looking to put in a picture and I put it in All About Birds, it did not come up, but then it came up in eBird, and I was trying to remember actually if it's considered countable. It might be for Christmas bird count for our area at least, because it's around San Antonio area. It's so common. I'm going to click on this next picture just so everybody can see, because they just kind of look goofy to me. It's like a little clown. If I was going to name it, I would name it the clown goose.
Clown goose. I like that.
Yeah.
And it's funny you say that about looking at something and saying like, you look introduced. I've had people tell me that about black-bellied whistling ducks before, because they're just so odd. And they're like, those don't look native. I don't know what they're doing, because they just don't fit the mold of everything else, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. We definitely kind of base it off of what we most commonly see. And tree ducks are, I mean, we've only got the 2 species, so they're just not something we commonly see, and so it doesn't quite fit our picture of what we expect. And that's a good way to describe it. I think they just don't fit our picture of what we expect with a goose.
Right.
So.
Well, and I think with the people who have just been living in Texas for so long, or wherever, and these are an introduced species that are just now starting to, really get their populations going. It's just something that the generations of people who've been living there have just never seen before. I think even if people don't know, what bird they're necessarily looking at, I think we all sort of pay attention to them, and you become accustomed to, those common things.
Especially ducks and geese, because like you say, because they're going to be out in parks and places that, people go more commonly. It's not like, vireos that you've got to be out in particular habitat looking really carefully. Like most of us are in places where we'll get to see these. So I'll point out too, these are, as far as looking at like different genera, the genus of the goose, you can see this is a lopichin. So it's a whole different genus from everything else we see. But all right. Well, I feel like we got a little bit of a late start, but I think we covered all of our geese and everything that we needed to cover. Any other parting thoughts about geese?
I will say one other sort of caveat when you're trying to do goose ID is we just gave an example of an established exotic or nearly established exotic, depending on where you are. Domestic geese get out all the time and will be on city ponds all the time. So if you're looking at a goose and you're like, well, it really doesn't look like any of those 5 native geese, look at gray lag goose, swan goose, those sort of domestic breeds and species, as it could be just one of those that's escaped or been released or something like that. That trips up a lot of beginner waterfowl ideas.
That's a good point. And because the same thing happens with ducks, you'll see what I call park ducks, and it's just like a plain white barnyard duck that is hanging out with the others. Or sometimes, and I feel like especially with mallards, they'll hybridize, and you're like, oh, that's a silly looking mallard. It's probably it's hybridized with a barnyard duck.
Right. Yeah, we call those Franken mallards.
I like that.
Like a bunch of random duck.
They really are. That's the thing that's funny is, it's just like everything put together. So that's a good thing to remember, especially when you're birding in an urban area, is that you get Franken ducks or geese that are just kind of different because it is a species that's, or it's a group of species that is domesticated. So keeps it interesting. So, all right. Well, thank you so much. Let me look and see what we have next week, kind of as a teaser. Oh, So next week we are talking the first cup chat of the year. We ended up doing kind of a preview of the year, and that took the whole time. But originally Emily had wanted to talk about New Year's resolutions. And so next week we are actually talking about New Year's resolutions. And Bryan, I don't know if you're joining us. Do you want to come next week? I think it's going to be just me and Emily and whomever else. I'm not sure. I better leave this to Emily as far as who all will be there. But it's kind of funny because they're, what is it, like 50% of people keep their resolutions for only 2 weeks or something like that. So we're going to talk about birding resolutions that you have. And we're going to talk about it later in January to inspire you to keep up with those resolutions and be in the top 50% of people and keep your resolutions. So
that's a great idea. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and with birding too, this is my perspective on resolutions as a whole. I don't really care that it happens like at the new year, because anytime can be a good time to set a goal or a resolution for yourself. You can be like, oh, it's January 19th. I'm going to set a resolution for myself. And so I don't know. I think we get too caught up on the new year in particular. So hopefully, even if you have other resolutions that you haven't been keeping, you are willing to join us in some late January resolution making. So.
Exactly. Yeah, that sounds like fun. I might have to just hop on if there's space available.
There's space. There's always space on the Zooms. But I will let Emily. Emily may have invited other people, so I'll let her be in charge of what she's supposed to be in charge of. So.
That's good.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this week. Thanks to everybody who participated in our social media sticker challenge. We're going to have to remember that next year and make it an annual thing when it's International Sticker Day. I don't know who comes up with those holidays, but we appreciate everybody who participated, and thanks, and we'll see you guys next week.
Bye.